I tell you what. Oh, actually, I've got a solution for Andy. Right, if he has the Zoom thing on, and if he actually watches this on YouTube as well, right? So, yeah, okay. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do something for Andy as well, and we might not have everybody on. So if I put this on the Archaeology Company Facebook as well, this is the wonders of technology. So I'll put it on the Archaeology Company Facebook, Andy. So if you it's live on YouTube. So I'm just trying to do all the technological stuff in the background a minute. Right, so here we go. Archaeology. La, 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 la. Right, that's it. Good. And one last thing for us, and we will be starting. All of this for Andy. You know, we can't do anything less for Andy today. I think I don't know what it is with that. It might be his lead or something. I don't know. Right. Okay. Right.
We lost Margaret as well. And Carl now.
Elsie, come here. Come here then. You coming for a cut or you going downstairs? Come on, come for a cut.
Right. Okay. Right. We've lost Margaret for some reason. I don't know. Okay, it's all on YouTube now. So I'm going to do the Archaeology of the American Civil War Part 1. And I would like to introduce this subject by saying that this is going to be quite a raw subject for me to do because I'm quite close to the subject matter, and I've got to try and avoid having a massive level of bias. Because I used to be very much involved with the study of this period, and I'm not one that prefers the one side losing than the other. So we'll put it that way. So what we do know about the American Civil War, it was an extremely bloody conflict, and what we do find is that the death rate in regards to the American Civil War was in excess of 600,000 over a period of 4 years. And the war began in April 1861 and ended. There are various sort of projections when it actually properly ended. But the last surrender of a Confederate general was on the 6th of June, 1865. More Union soldiers died than Southern soldiers, and the balance of victories to Southerners and Northerners is probably equal. There are a number of great Confederate victories as much as there are a great number of Union victories. The American Civil War involved Native Americans, people from North and South, and people who were of slave background as well. It absorbed everybody in America, and in North America, that is, and it's a war that is still being bled out in some of the mines and streets of the United States even today. And the archaeology itself hopes to not answer some of the outstanding problems of the American Civil War, but the archaeology hopes to understand the battlefields and hopes to give some credence on the historical records in regards to how the battles were fought, and various other information. In regards to the American Civil War, we've over 2,000 large-scale skirmishes and battles over a period of 4 years. That's 2,000, and there's some battlefields that which have also been lost. There are lots of very minor skirmishes as well, hundreds, if not 1,000 plus little minor skirmishes. So it's a landscape that the archaeologists can hope to offer us much data. And one thing in regards to the archaeology of the American Civil War is taken very, very seriously. And hopefully what we will see today is some sense in regards to what the American Civil War was about. I have deliberately made the step today of not showing a map of the United States and where the Confederate and the Union States sat within the landscape. I've deliberately done that because I don't want this to become a political, passionate plea on one side or the other. I'm not going to show any flags. I'm not going to show any people of white or black origin. It's going to be a lecture that's based on the archaeology, because I don't want anything that's inappropriate dragged into this today. I will say from at the top of this, however, that I do not believe the American Civil War was fought due to slavery, and we're not even going to discuss that. That's my own personal opinion. So I put my bias already on the screen. This itself is a photographic image of Antietam Creek, and Antietam Creek, Sharpsville, is one of the more bloodier battles of the American Civil War. We do have, in regards to lots of professional archaeological data in regards to these battles, and I can even give you a little bit of information as we go along. The level of interest in the American Civil War, as I said, is very much up there. And in fact, carbines, cavalry carbines, which can be found dropped in rivers as Confederate or Union soldiers retreated, are still being dragged up in perfect condition. We get really good assemblages of human remains. In fact, we get bullets all the way down to obsidian arrowheads associated with the American Civil War. Now, bullets fired from a musket or a rifle, and you get obsidian arrowheads shot by Native Americans who fought on both the north and the southern side in the American Civil War. This is very much like the Patrick Swayze series called North and South, where in fact everyone was involved on one side or another. Slave fighting slave, brother fighting brother. And it's in that ingrained nature that we implore to get some truth out of the archaeology. And it cannot be just done in one instance. We need to let this one settle today, and then we need to come back to it in a few months' time. Because one of the things that people really struggle with is archaeology that's been undertaken within archaeological layers that are basically within the historic period of living memory. In fact, even in the 1950s, there were still Confederate and Union veterans still alive. Actually, Union veterans, so the last Confederate veteran, I think, died in 1947. So there are people who are touching living memory that would have spoken to people who were involved in this conflict. And that makes the excavation of human remains very, very awkward, because some of the bodies that are being excavated within living memory have got living relatives around today. And one subject I will not touch is the archaeology of the Second World War, because it gets very emotive, and it's too raw still. So I think the best thing to do is start with a lighter image, a lighter image of a garden where people are excavating American Civil War period archaeology. So I'm just going to turn to my notes now. And my headlines on my notes are Civil War POW camp in rural Georgia uncovered by archaeologists in 2010. We will look at that. Interesting. We're also going to look at the one of the earliest submarines, an excavation of one of the earliest submarines, the H.L. Hunley. We'll just mention that. So this isn't just land archaeology. We're also I've also got a nice little piece here, which is Civil War archaeology, which was published in 2017 at Atlanta. I've got some nice little facts about one or two battles. And actually, a most intriguing thing, when I was giving up, trying to find information for this presentation today, I just found a page. I sort of got a little bit excited about it because it's one of those blogs that somebody's put together with a load of artifacts, loads of little facts, excavations in people's gardens. Is fab, right? It's absolutely fab, and this stuff not only takes us into the American Civil War, but actually takes us into other wars as well. I'm looking at a New York staff officer's button, which has been excavated. The Battle of Antietam Creek buttons from that battle, which are on here as well. I'm just playing with you at this minute because I just want to get into some of the text that I've got in front of me. So I think the first one that we're going to do comes from good old Georgia, and it comes from good old Atlanta, which is in the heart of the Confederate breadbasket, it could be called. And I've got to bite my teeth and be very careful what I say today, because I don't aim to spoil what we're doing. Right, we just moved off a load of images there. We're looking at this one. Confederate defenses. What's left of Confederate defenses? These are trenches. The American Civil War, it could be said, is the first modern war, is the first mechanical war, is the first time a Gatling gun is being seen on a battlefield. It's the first time that you have generals leading men over the top, and not hundreds, thousands of men being killed. Pickett's charge at Gettysburg, 3,000 men are killed in one charge. So this is mechanical death. This is also a war that sees more people dying from infection than were actually killed in the fighting. Recently, we've heard about a prison in Kabul where Taliban fighters were just left and abandoned to fend for themselves with no water and food, right? A Bagram base airport. Their guards ran away and had just left them in the prison cells, right? That's a modern war. But this type of thing was going on in the American Civil War hundreds of years, not hundreds of years earlier, but 160 years earlier. So what we're doing in essence, we're seeing a war that's very modern in its interpretation. So this first battle that we're actually going to be looking at, that this trench, that this sort of type of thing that you might see at Verdun or the Somme or Passchendaele, right? Or you might see it on the Eastern Front in regards to the Second World War. You might see this at Gallipoli, right? This is nothing new, right? This is a modern war. So it's very important for me to keep saying that. And interesting enough, here's a few firsts. Aircraft were used in this war. When I say aircraft, they had balloons. They were able to use balloons to use in reconnaissance. The Confederacy had balloons and the Union had balloons. It's also the first war that aerial photography is used by either side to actually gain an advantage over the enemy. So, you know, I know you think, oh, aircraft hasn't got 2 wings and whatever, hasn't got that. But yeah, let's call a balloon an aircraft. So in regards to the Civil War, the archaeology offers a unique perspective on the Civil War. If you try and keep your bias at bay, allowing archaeologists and historians to look at this defining event from a material perspective, without thinking about racism, without thinking about white and black, without thinking about those things that are being discussed today. We need to look at this from a mechanical point of view, as the war was mechanical in a sense. The nature of Civil War archaeology, in our sense, in a British sense, is to be seen yet again in the British Civil War. You could argue that there were sort of trenches in the British Civil War between 1641 and 1649, or depending on which bit of the war you ended, or 1648 or whatever it was, 1642, different starts and ends in different parts of the country. You could argue that there were trenches involved with the British Civil War, but it wasn't as mechanical like this. It was not. It was very different. The British Civil War, 200 odd years earlier, was very different from this war. There weren't balloons. Their guns weren't really accurate. Artillery wasn't very accurate. You know, there wasn't much in the way of reconnaissance and maps and all these other things. So it's not, the British Civil War can't be argued as a modern war. It's sort of a pseudo modern war in a way. So in reconstructing the Civil War, the material context of the war is key. Archaeologists study, in regards to the American Civil War, the artifacts, features, and sites. Now, inevitably, the artifacts can be regarded very much within the features and the sites, as we will mention now. Artifacts, as we can probably associate, are man-made objects, or objects that have been attributed to human beings. Such as bullets, such as pipe fragments, such as pottery, residue from eating activities. Those all are reminiscent of artifacts. Uniform buttons and so on. Interesting enough, the American Civil War has challenges, because you can't look at buttons that have been left behind, which might have a Confederate or Union insignia, to actually represent a Union or Confederate soldier, because there was a lot of clothes swapping. It was a bit like the Battle of the Bulge campaign in late 1944 December, where the German army requisitioned large amounts of American uniforms, and they would go around in American uniforms because they were better than German uniforms. So if you find that American uniform on a German soldier, you could be mistaken for thinking it's actually an American soldier when in fact it's not. So you've got all these questions that offer us new angles, right? In other words, it's back to what I said last week. I think it was on Thursday. I'm not sure I said it on Tuesday. In regards to burials, female burials being found. Oh yeah, there was this thing last week that this body was found, and it was by Thursday it was, so I didn't tell you on Tuesday. And they basically said, because the person's buried with male and female objects, the person had no sexuality. And I actually thought, what absolute load of rubbish. Because it's just like putting a category on things. So I think what we need to do with the American Civil War, it's an opportunity to be more open. In regards to most archaeology, what you do see, you look at an artifact and you say, this is this, right? And that's all you go. That's as far as you go. And that's a shame, because it doesn't open the expression that you actually need to understand the true history and archaeology of the past. Features are similar to artifacts. So we basically mentioned the three components: artifacts, features, and sites. So features are similar to artifacts in that they are created by human hands. So features are ditches and banks and so on. But unlike artifacts, they cannot be physically separated from the landscape. So features themselves are very much part of the landscape rather than artifacts ain't. So you can pick up an artifact and say, bloody hell, this is part of a Colt revolver. You can't do that with an earthwork because it's actually embedded in the landscape. Examples of features include military trenches or the remains of a soldier's fire pit. So obviously the artifacts found within the fire pit are the artifacts, and the features are actually the fire pit. So there's two definitions of archaeology there. Sites are defined as locations that contain a collection of artifacts or features. So in fact, Gettysburg is a site. It's not a feature, it's not an artifact. The Battle of Gettysburg is a site. The Battle of the Siege of Richmond, the Confederate capital, that's a site. So there's three definitions there. So we talk about the site containing features and artifacts. So battlefields and forts being sites. Civil War archaeologists look for patterns of these three elements, and they call it the American Civil War Trinity of archaeology as a means to interpret past behavior and activities. You know, one of the greatest films about the American Civil War, and I'm going to say it, is Gone with the Wind. Because lots of the uniforms used in Gone with the Wind would probably be actually contemporary Confederate or Union uniforms. I'd be so close in living memory that people could actually talk about what Atlanta was like when the film, when it was being filmed in 1938, 1939. I know that you think that might sound strange, but it's not. It's not. I can remember we've Gone with the Wind. They talk about a doctor and his field hospital. He's a Confederate doctor in his field hospital, and doesn't Scarlett go out to help in the field hospital? All these different things, right? So you can imagine that's being influenced as a film by actually people who lived and are still around in the 1930s, right? That's historical references to the archaeology and historical references that are based on living memory is when you use the archaeology to really understand what was going on. Are these historical references that might be quite faded actually real? So you need to have these elements of artifacts, features, and sites to give a contextual framework. And the American Civil War is a very sad war. It's a bit like the First World War. It's the first time that we can get poets talking about the terrible nature of war. It's the first time that you get press reports talking about those that had died in certain battles. People used to line up to get the local newspaper to see if their son or daughter, used as a nurse, had actually been killed that day, or not that day, the day previous. It's a war with telegrams. People go around with telegrams as well. So it's a war very similar to the First World War. You've got that dreaded telegram. It's a war of letters, actual letters being sent home from the men to their lovers back at home and their wives. It's a war of diaries. Many, many diaries have survived. official military records, and other primary historical documents, which assist. The archaeology assists the history, and the history assists in some way the archaeology, because those features could be understood by the history, and the history understood by the features. Some artifacts that we're not sure of may have actually been described in newspaper reports, so you know what these artifacts are. The sites in the archaeology may not have names, but the historical documents that we do find give name to those sites. That's very, very important. An archaeological approach to the Civil War allows a wide array of wartime participants to enter the historical picture. Before I put a little bit of meat on what that historical picture means, what we need to do is this is actually a sketch of the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, which happened to be a Confederate victory. There were Union soldiers trying to gain control of Kennesaw Mountain, and the Confederacy managed to keep them at bay. This is a sketch of the very moment that the Union troops were breaching defenses at Kennesaw Ridge, Kennesaw Mountain, in 1864. This has been enhanced, I'm told, but this is as good as it gets. To a photograph. There was photography around back then, but not to get the smoke and dust of the battlefield, as we saw with those dead at Antietam Creek not so long ago, Sharpsburg. So to sort of try and, this is Confederate soldiers dragging their cannons up to the top of the hill. Those very same cannons that are actually from this sketch being seen, placed into action in this very terrifying war. I'm really putting this over very seriously today, because this is very serious. You can't postulate and make gags about things in this situation, because this is very, very real. Do you know, my granddad, if he may have known some of these people that were actually involved in this conflict. So as to, you know, you can think about that. And you know, Pete may have bumped into somebody, an American who was an elderly American wandering around, whatever. But the point is, what I can say is very, very relevant. It's very, very relevant to understand that the archaeology needs to be teased out with a sense of utter respect, rather than the contempt that we sometimes judge history and archaeology. So the historical picture can be seen to be the historical picture can be seen to be a site that's almost a stage, right? A stage, and the actors in the past are those people who actually acted out those moments. They're very dying moments. They're very real actors in the past. And what we need to do, we need to work out where all these artifacts are, to work out where these actors are on the stage. What was their very last moment? What were those artifacts actually telling us? What we do see is often the perspective of the common soldier, for example, can be presented only from an archaeological standpoint. That's a very important statement. So those actors on the stage that we're trying to interpret, we're actually trying to see on the stage from the artifacts on the great stage, which is the site itself, those moments in time can only sometimes be read from the archaeology. Sometimes the very actions of those individual soldiers on that stage cannot really be seen, because some of these people that were writing the letters and diaries and those that were writing the official military records were obviously literate. There were lots of people who were common soldiers that couldn't read and write. And that makes some of the history quite marginal. So we've got to be very, very careful sometimes with the history. Not all of the history paints the picture that we really need to see. So we're going to look at some bullets a minute. We can't do this without looking at some bullets. Let's just have a good old look at some bullets. Now, this is bullets recovered during archaeological excavations at Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield in Cobb County. Include standard federal issues of a .58 caliber mini-type bullet, a case-shot, and a William Cleaner bullet. So basically, primary documents indicate that these artifacts were recovered from the site of a Union Army bivouac. And what we do see is that this archaeological evidence is obviously evidence that people were camping out and were sort of there besieging each other. So obviously the Confederates on Kennesaw Mountain National Field ridge defended against the Unions. So what have we got? We've got so we've got the caliber, these .58 caliber type bullets. Okay, and we've obviously got these. It's talking about, you've got the bottom right, haven't you? Which is a smaller caliber bullet, and you've got a case shot as well. The case shot is actually come from a cannon. Basically, a case shot would have been a cartridge which would have been full of these basically this shot that would have sprayed out and done a great deal of damage and carnage on the battlefield. So thinking about the evidence that we've got in front of us, some of this evidence actually excavated. What does this tell us from what I'm going to tell you about the battle now? I'll just give you a few little bits of facts from this battle at Kennesaw Ridge. Right, so let's put my bias in here first. This is a Confederate victory, okay, between Generals Sherman and Joseph E. Johnson. Joseph E. Johnson would later be the last major Confederate general to actually surrender, except he wouldn't be the last general to surrender. That was General Waite's arrangement of troops on the 6th of June. So Kennesaw Mountain itself, the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, was part of the Atlanta Campaign, which again, the Atlanta Campaign is that's what Gone with the Wind is all about. It was a battle that involved over 16,000 combatants on the Union side and nearly 18,000 on the Confederate side. Right, the Union losses were around 3,000 and Confederate losses were around 1,000. And this was a rare Confederate victory in regards to that campaign, because Sherman would eventually, the likes of Atlanta would eventually be captured, right, and Sherman would eventually march onto the sea, and it was a moment that could have changed the whole campaign, but it didn't work out that way. And there's lots of information in front of me on here, and one of the big reasons why the Union Army suffered greatly was because it was attacking a ridge. And it was a ridge that was well fortified by the Confederates. But I'm going to go back with my other notes again now. just giving you a little bit of information there. So let's go back to my notes that we were doing, right? So what we do see is that there's lots of archaeological excavations being done in regards to Atlanta and the Georgian landscape. There's lots of sites around Atlanta that haven't been built on, and they're readily available to be archaeologically excavated. So archaeological investigations of Georgia's Civil War past may involve a number of different types of sites, including battlefields, training camps, bivouacs, encampments, earthen fortifications, masonry fortifications, and other strictly military features on the landscape. Other types of sites such as mills, farms, railroads. Very importantly, I'm going to say something after this statement. Allow archaeological researchers to study aspects of the war that are not strictly military in origin, and thus glean a more complete picture of the war and how it affected all citizens, military and civilian. The one point I'd like to make there is that the American Civil War is not just about military. It is not just about the military. It's not just about battles. It's not just about skirmishes. It's not just about death. It's about common people as well. It's about the Union Army going into Confederate areas and ripping up railroads so that the food couldn't get to the civilians. It's about the Confederates doing exactly the same in Missouri, where Union railroads would be disrupted and food wouldn't be able to get to the civilians. The civilians would suffered. And the blockades of the Union on the Confederacy caused great hardship on the Confederates' ability to actually continue the war. One of the things that eventually stopped the Confederacy was actually the blockade. It actually nearly led, and we've obviously heard about Lord Palmerston, and it nearly led to a war between Great Britain, the British Empire, and the Union, because the Union would be stopping Royal Navy vessels which were carrying Confederate officials back and forth, and it could have led to the British being dragged into this war. If the British had been dragged into the war, then we could have lost Canada. One of the first archaeological investigations into the Civil War in Georgia was actually undertaken in the 1930s. Right. And one thing I haven't mentioned is that the reason why I mentioned the naval stuff there again is because it's the first time that we actually see what's known as ironclads. Right. It's basically iron vessels out at sea, and obviously the use of submarines. So this in a way, if it had involved the British Empire, it could then be described as the First World War, but it didn't happen that way. The British were getting really, mind my French, pissed off with the blockades because the Confederacy was actually supplying 90% of the worldwide cotton reserves. But eventually, people started growing cotton in other places, and flax was introduced to Britain, and that's another story, isn't it, Andy? Flax mills and all the rest of it. So people managed to use other materials instead of cotton, but again, water, sea, British, and so on. So as we've said, the first excavations in regards to Civil War battlefields in Georgia were being undertaken at Kennesaw Mountain, the very site that we're discussing, in the 1930s. An archaeologist known as Charles Fairbanks undertook the documentation and limited excavation of Confederate earthworks at the top, earthworks at the battle site on top of the mountain. So if we go back to that original image that we showed earlier on, there we go. Buttons, Union buttons, nice, like it. And obviously, if Union buttons like this were actually found, then it doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually worn by Union soldiers. Very key point again. Very, very, very important there. That's actually Gettysburg there. So back to this image again. Back to this very intriguing image. So this is where the first archaeological excavations in regards to a Georgian American Civil War site was actually being undertaken. And it was deemed at that point by the archaeologist Charles Fairbank that his work was actually pioneering. Stop. Of course it's pioneering. No. It's pioneering because people weren't interested in the archaeology of the American Civil War. They didn't see it being relevant because it was within living memory. This is the 1930s. The war had been over 65 years, but if you were 20 years old at the end of the American Civil War, you'd be 85 years old, and they were still having reunions of Union and Confederate soldiers into the 1930s and into the 1940s. I think the last one may have been 1942, I'm not sure. I saw an image and there was this coloured soldier there as well. It was really interesting. Confederate, Union, and there was a coloured soldier. I thought that was really interesting. So, whereas, now I'm not going down that avenue where I was just about to go down. So Fairbanks Archaeological Excavations in Georgia at Kennesaw Mountain, few archaeologists at the time recognized the value in investigating the Civil War from an archaeological perspective. All that we needed from the American Civil War was actually written down. It was photographed. We didn't, but we did need more. We really did need more. We really did. Instead, what was happening in America, there was a level of bias. People were interested in older sites or newer sites like Williamsburg or anything to do with the American War of Independence. Not until the passage of the National Historical Preservations Act in 1966 did Civil War archaeology expand. In fact, American Civil War archaeology was being protected. And you can't go too far in America without stumbling over an American Civil War battlefield site, which is very well protected. The downside is, folks, that the Native American stuff that isn't being given the same level of protection. Naughty Carl. So based in 1966, there was this National Historical Preservation Act, and it said that it provides for the recording of archaeological and historical resources in an area to be disturbed by a federal undertaking. So in other words, you had federal jurisdiction and you had federal funding to be used in the excavation of American Civil War sites. American Civil War archaeology became very important in 1966. More important than Native American archaeology. But again, please stop. The funding of the archaeological work used federal reserves. And those federal reserves would be diverted from road improvement stuff and so on. But the fact of the matter is, this drew the populace of America into understanding and wishing to know more about the American Civil War archaeology. So the passing of the Act in 1966 drew attention to Civil War sites as not only historical, but archaeological resources, not just the protection of Gettysburg, or the embattled defenses of Richmond. But what it did say was the archaeology was to be protected just in time, because it would only be a few years before people were starting to use metal detectors. You can imagine the amount of damage that could have caused. So what So the archaeological resources led to numerous sites throughout the states and the state being recorded and investigated for the first time by archaeologists, more so in the 1960s. And there was basically a lot of protection placed onto the landscape in regards to the archaeology and history in connection with the Atlanta campaign, the Battle of Atlanta. And basically, previously, the sites had been known only to amateur collectors. Now, the big boy archaeologists were involved, and the archaeology was to be protected. So what I'm thinking of doing, I'll go on a little bit longer. I've realised that there's a lot I want to do today, but again, if we have a second one, it doesn't matter if I don't do it. Archaeologists versus relic collectors. This is really important. I've mentioned that. So let's just try and change the images again. Let's see where we go again. I think let's go back again. You know, sort of relic hunting, right, from archaeological excavation to obsidian arrowheads. It's very interesting that, again, let's set the scene for relic hunting now. Relic hunting versus archaeology before the protection in 1966, and it's still a problem today. Obsidian arrowheads on a battlefield might be ploughed up or something, and you're thinking, but these are associated with American Civil War battlefields. It's amazing, isn't it? That and the reason why Native Americans were being used, like, this is a thing, you see, right? It could say in the history books the Native Americans were used, but what were they used for? Cleaning people's boots? What were they used for? Being completely disrespected and punished, right? But there were lots of Native American tribes who actually sided with the Confederacy because they had a better deal than what the Union was offering them, right? And Native Americans were used not to fire rifles; they were actually used to, I know, stereotypical, but we'll say it, hide in trees with their bows and arrows to pick off officers. This is what Native Americans were used for. And you know what? If you shoot an arrow off in a battle, nobody can see your position. Right? You can be above people, nobody can see your position. Right? This is the advantage of a Native American with their obsidian arrowheads. So this is Antietam Creek. This is Sharpsburg. This is what this battle was about. In regards to capture this bridge, thousands of lives lost over fighting for this bridge, and again, artifacts versus archaeology. So that's what we'll do after the break. So what we're going to do, are there any questions, folks?
No.
I don't think they could have fought this battle or these battles without the horses.
Horses were massive.
Yeah.
Again, there's another thing as well, is if we want to go through the list, what did the Romans ever do for us? Horses, right? Horses were massive in the American Civil War. Very interesting point is, there's a point that I used that I learned about 35 years ago, right? There was an interesting, when the American Civil War broke out, the best cavalry were in the South, right? And the best artillery men were in the South, and the best infantry were in the North. Now, if the North had the best cavalry and the best infantry and the best artillery, the war would have been over in a week, right? But the North had more soldiers, twice the amount of soldiers than the Confederacy, right? But the Confederacy had the best cavalry. They had General Bedford Forrest for one, Stonewall Jackson, all these names, these cavalry officers. These were all trained. I'm not sure about Bedford Forrest, but lots of these officers were trained at West Point. At one point, Robert E. Lee was actually offered command of the Union Army, right? The great Robert E. Lee, right, was actually offered command of the Union Army. If he had been offered command of the Union Army, the war would have been over in a year, right? Because he was so talented. But unfortunately, he was always up against the fact that the Union always had twice the amount of what the Confederacy had of everything, even horses. Even though the Confederacy had the best horsemen, they had the best artillery, but they didn't have as many cannons as the North. As the Confederacy was actually capturing cannons on battlefields, the Union would be making 10 cannons for every cannon that the Confederacy had. Right. So, so anything else, folks, before we have a break?
I just wonder how they managed to feed the horses. There must have been hundreds, if not thousands of them.
Like the First and the Second World War, you'd be surprised to hear that that if it hadn't been for the horse in the Second World War, the Germans wouldn't have even been able to do Barbarossa. The Germans wouldn't have been even to organize most of their campaigns to Stalingrad, going into the Caucasus. The horse, in fact, in the invasion of France was massively important. People always forget the value of the horse to the Germans in the Second World War. The horse was massively important in the First World War. The horse was massively important to the American Civil War as well. But not as important in the American War of Independence, I may say.
No.
Because if you're wondering, yeah, it's a very different war. So, okay, if there's no other questions, we'll take a break now. We'll be back soon, folks.
Okie dokie.
Okie dokie. I'm going to put my thing on mute and...
Phenomenal. He gets a pat on the back from Chris Lynn. You've just got to sit there and watch that open mouth. That's the biggest one of the lot. That's halfway up the Western Terrace.
Ooh.
Awesome. That is an awesome display of power hitting. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. And he's even getting congratulated by the superchargers. They know that that was some knock. that was massive because the superchargers were looking like getting 180 plus.
And the flying.
Yeah, and those wickets really kind of stemmed the flow. Brilliant from Livingston and Phoenix. They go straight to Lords. They're in the final. So eliminator now will be between the Southern Brave and the Trent Rockets at the Oval Ground on Friday evening. See the superchargers just step back and just give them an applause. Just to see this down here, so. And then all the Phoenix team, they know what a special innings that's been.
Yeah, yeah, that's a mark of respect, that is. What a knock. What a innings by Livingston. Captain nicely as well.
Yeah.
He's some white ball cricketer, that is for sure.
Well, in the end, it was one-sided, but what entertainment that we've had throughout the day. The women's game in the afternoon was great. And now, in fact, tremendous entertainment at night from the men. Liam Livingston, just about him, 92 from 40. Finn Allen, he got 42 from 26, but you don't even mention him. Pedestrian, they've chased down that target with 26 balls to go. Incredible striking. And the Colours, Willie with that wicket in his first set, and then he was dispatched in that final set of the power play. And Parkinson with another one. He got hit for a few sixes. Not a great night for the rest of them, but they were up against a powerhouse in Liam Livingston.
Have you ever been to America, David?
Oh, yeah. Probably a dozen times.
Oh, lucky you. I've never been. Whereabouts did you used to go?
Oh, mainly up and down the East Coast shipyards.
Oh, yeah. Oh, is that with your work?
Yeah.
Oh, right. What an interesting job you had.
Yeah.
What did you do exactly? Were you an engineer?
Yeah. We're designing submarines,
Gosh.
mainly.
Weren't you something to do with the Concorde?
Yes, I was apprentice on Concorde.
Oh. It was almost before its time, wasn't it, Concorde?
Yeah, it was stymied by the Americans. They wouldn't let it go to New York. They said it was too noisy.
Yeah.
So that's
The
because they
Yanks
had no
again.
one to compete with it.
Those Yanks. Wasn't it? I seem to remember there was an accident, wasn't there?
At the
The
very
French
end.
one, yeah.
Is that why it was halted, the program?
Well, just an excuse to halt it, yeah.
Oh,
It would have been halted years before, after the Arabs kept it going. Most of its work was back into the United Arab Emirates with all their oil money.
mm. I wonder how popular Joe Biden is in America with the Afghan thing.
Mm.
You do feel sorry for the families of people that have been killed over there. They're saying it just seems as if it was for nothing now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the families of the soldiers that actually were killed.
Awful.
Yeah.
Who keeps bleeping?
That was my mobile.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, it's probably a text.
Is that you again, Pete?
Yeah.
I keep thinking it's me.
What's this? Yeah. Who eats all that? Yes. Right.
Oh, it's getting dark early. It's only 9 o'clock and it's dark.
Yeah,
Did
yeah.
you come in?
Yes, I had to nip
Oh,
out to feed
no.
my fish before it got dark.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't want winter.
No, me.
Oh my God. And it lasts for such a long time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Those dark, wet days, I just hate them. Doesn't look as if Andy managed to get his computer going.
No, sadly.
Shame.
Hmm.
Our
It's
numbers
usually
are
pretty good,
dwindling.
One, two, three, four, five. Artificial life. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let it go again.
Doesn't that look a mess? Carl's. What a mess. No wonder Michelle let them.
It looks interesting, doesn't it?
That's one word for it. Yeah.
Organized chaos.
Aye.
Oh, my sister-in-law wouldn't like that. She's so fussy.
Oh, right.
When I stayed with my brother and her, my brother hung the washing out, and then she went and rehung it all again. It wasn't good enough.
You can't play the bloody thing.
What? It's a bib gone.
Sounds like a kazoo.
Where's this?
Mind you, I much prefer the.
Well, my dog's ears have just pricked up. He's ready for the hunt. Have you
I don't know how to get back into this now because I was really so serious earlier on.
You were.
The problem is it's not something I can jest or joke about. I was actually years and years ago, right? I was going to I was going to do an excavation on bodies at a concentration camp, and I just thought I just couldn't deal with it.
No.
And that's not just in living memory. That is just now. Do you know what I mean? So
it was interesting when you said about the Gone with the Wind film.
Yeah.
Very.
They'd actually got the information from people that were involved.
Very.
It seems such a long time ago, but in actual fact, it's not really, is it?
If you think about Gone with the Wind,
it's the time that Queen Victoria was and Palmerston were building all the defences around the UK, and that's
exactly
when Patton defences were built.
Exactly.
Wow.
At the same time, yeah.
Exactly. It's all the sort of it's all within. The thing is, if you were an American Civil War soldier on either side, and obviously you were 20 when the war ended, and it's 1930. As I said, you're 85 years old, right? And there were still a lot of veterans who were 85, 90, 95 years old who were still alive, right? And their children, their children are around, and it's so people remember things, and there's all that. It's still around, And
My next door neighbor was a nurse in the RAF during the war.
Which one?
the old one who's still driving around, she's 99.
Still driving around.
Oh,
She's 100 in February.
oh, bless her.
Do you know what my granddad used to say when he was 90? When he was 93, my dad said, "Why don't you go to one of those old people's clubs, right?" And my granddad said, "I'm not sitting around with those old people."
Oh. This is it. You never think of yourself as old.
No.
Do you? Inside, you're just the same as you were in your 30s.
Yeah.
Exactly. Claire is still 30, so I don't know what she's moaning about.
I'm 52 in a couple of days' time.
Oh,
I gotta say,
ooh.
mind my French, are you crap? You're not 52, are you?
No.
I am in a couple of days.
No, you're not.
I don't mix with the old ones.
You're mixing with us, with David and I.
You're not old, yeah.
Hey, Carl,
Yeah, go on.
I was born on Witches Hour.
Ooh.
What? All Hallows you October.
All Hallows Eve.
No, dead on midnight.
Midnight.
My daughter was as well.
Oh wow!
Midnight Hour. Is that your favourite song?
So basically, is it the 30th of October or the 31st, or are you just in the middle?
My daughter's
Oh,
born
I'm
on
August
31st.
29th. Between the 1 and the 2, dead on midnight.
Oh wow! Oh, that one.
Yeah. And do you
Oh.
know the funny thing is?
Go on.
My brother's name is Matthew.
Oh my God! Let's leave that. Don't call him Hopkins. Right. Okay. Let's get into this. So I'm gonna. I don't know. I'm completely confused now. I've lost the will. Right. Okay. So one thing I want to share you: mummified skeleton of former slave discovered in Pompeii tomb. A partially mummified skeleton of a former slave with hair and one ear remarkably well preserved has been discovered by archaeologists in an imposing tomb in Pompeii. Yeah, it goes along with that joke, doesn't it? I've got 1 year. Oh.
Oh, got 1 year. Oh dear.
So in other words, there they are buried. Actually, the internal workings there look really pristine. So the skeleton was found in an ancient tomb in the necropolis area of Pompeii. The discovery casts new light on the cultural mix of the ancient city and raises fresh questions about its funerary rites and the degree to which slaves were able to become respected members of society after being given their freedom. Archaeologists said it was one of the best preserved skeletons ever found at Pompeii, the Roman town which was buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius nearly 2,000 years ago. And as an archaeologist, you know what I would do? I would record that and I would seal it back up.
Let's have another look at the skeleton. It's got very chunky knees.
Bit like Pete. And note that they're so almost resting up against the back of the chamber as well.
Yeah.
It looks very empty. Do you know what I mean? Obviously it would have been a family vault or something, wouldn't it? It was waiting for other people to be placed in there.
Oh.
So
and they know who it was.
Dave.
Must admit, Pompeii was an amazing place when I
yeah.
was there. It was so big.
Oh gosh.
And this is the area. Obviously, it's not all been excavated because there's some pumice still there, right?
Yeah.
So aged in his 60s, the man had managed to rise to a certain social and economic status. The commemorative inscription made reference to Laudae Graciae, or theatre performances that he gave in Greek rather than Latin. Greek slave by the looks of it. It is the first time that experts have found solid evidence that plays performed at Pompeii were recited in Greek. That performances in Greek were organized is evidence of the likely and open cultural climate which characterized ancient Pompeii. And basically, unfortunately, there they are removing the body, but okay. Oh, look at the date on that box. The 3rd of the 8th, 2021. So this is like 2 weeks old. That's it.
Yeah.
Amazing. Quickly, the reference showed that Pompeii was a melting pot where Greek, then the Luaga Franca of the Eastern Mediterranean was spoken alongside Latin.
There's an amphitheater there in Pompeii.
Yes, there is. Yeah, it is. The skeleton and tomb were found in an ancient necropolis, a Porta Sano, which is not yet open to the public. Traces of the decoration were found on the wall of the tomb, paintings of green plants against a blue background. Or you can just basically see it there, faded. It's saying that adults, it said archaeologists said adults were usually cremated in ancient Rome and only small children were buried. Yes, which made the discovery all the remarkable. And you can see the hair. Oh my God, look at that ear.
Oh, you got more than I have.
But shut up, Pete.
That's
But
amazing, isn't it?
look at the ear there.
Yeah.
That is absolutely amazing. With the hair, absolutely amazing. It's got grey hair, and like you, Pete, yours has gone white, haven't it? Really, really well preserved. And the burial of Marcus Venerius is highly unusual. Oh, there's his name, Marcus Venerius. Around 60 years old. Anyway, let's go back to where we are. Let's get back into it. And where are we now? Hang on a minute. I've got to stop that, and we got to get back into where we were. Artifacts. And you can see this on the screen, yeah?
Yeah.
Right, so if I hopefully that'll get me back into where I was. So I think one of the things I wanted to mention was that sort of before this 1966 thing, before these archaeological sites become important. So it's basically between the archaeologists saying the American Civil War is important. The American Civil War is our history. The American Civil War needs to be respected. Versus people going metal detecting, digging up things and putting them on display in their house. The practice of Civil War relic collecting began during the war itself and often took place immediately following a particular engagement, where local civilians would search the battlefields for souvenirs. Can I just mention this? The early stages of the war in 1861, the Battle of Bull Run, which was a Confederate victory, known by the Union as the Manassas Junction. The Bull Run, interestingly enough, it was held between Richmond and Washington, and Confederate families would go out watching the battle, eating nuts and stuff, and then Union families would be on the other side, watching and eating grapes and all these whatever things. Right? It was like Sunday afternoon watching cricket. And hopefully no civilians would get killed. So this is a thing. After the battlefield, people would collect souvenirs. The collection of such artifacts or relics has been and continues to be a popular pastime, but differs from archaeology in both approach and intent. Now illegal since 1966 on federal and most state property, the practice of relic collecting has led to an interest has led to an inherent bias in what remains of the archaeological record of Georgia's Civil War battlefields in particular. Some relic collectors have aided archaeological studies greatly. However, by volunteering their knowledge and time to a common interest in the state's Civil War history. So I was saying, obviously, you know, if somebody's metal detecting and they're finding a row of bullets on a battlefield and so on, that can help us understand where the soldiers were being shot at, or equally where they're actually firing from. All those different things gives you an idea of where the battle actually took place, rather than relying upon first-hand accounts on maps when a battle was moving around, which can be very inaccurate, really. Relic collectors introduced metal detectors as a tool. And metal detecting didn't get really popular until the late 1960s, but soldiers were coming back from the Second World War, and metal detectors were already a tool used in the Second World War. So actually metal detectors were being used by some as early as the 1940s and 1950s, but not popular until the late 1960s when they become very commercial. So
what is that Y-shaped tool, Carl?
What's that?
What's that Y-shaped tool?
It's actually for it's oh god, it's a oh god, I had it earlier on. I had the name for it in my head. It's a tool that's used for adjusting, repairing and taking apart a rifle or a musket.
Oh, okay.
And I remember the name of it. Well, I used to use one of these when I used to be around people who used to use these when we used to have Brown Bess muskets that we used to use for the American War of Independence. So that's what that is, Pete. It's an adjusting tool.
Okay.
And that most soldiers would, well,
I can see what everything else was, but that was just a puzzle.
Yes, that's what that is. Considered beneath the standards of the discipline, the practice was stigmatized for many years by the archaeological community. We don't want metal detecting enthusiasts anywhere near this because it was causing a lot of damage. But now what they're finding is metal detectors can be seen to be very useful in regards to battlefield sites. For example, in regards to the Battle of Little Bighorn in, I think that's 1876, in the 1980s, they found that they can either verify or use the archaeology to tell different stories about the Battle of Bighorn, where General Custer was actually, his command was wiped out, about 250 men. General Custer was actually a general involved in the American Civil War. He wasn't a marvelously successful general in the American Civil War, and he wasn't very successful at the Battle of Little Bighorn either. But he's the guy who's gone down in history. Anyway, recent investigations of Georgia's Civil War battlefields have incorporated the results of the Little Bighorn study to try to understand how things are left to lie around on a battlefield. So, example, what does a collection of buckles mean in a certain area? What does a collection of unspent cannon shot mean? Well, we can probably understand what a load of unspent cannon shot means. Basically, that's where the cannon was, right? So all this sort of interpretation from other battlefield sites can help us understand and have a way of interpreting the archaeology on American Civil War battles field sites. And so if you find various different bits of archaeological evidence, we might know what it means now. So back to the earlier thing that we mentioned, all the way back to the top of the screen on my notes. We mentioned about artifacts, features, and sites. The artifacts tell the immediate stories of the events, right? It's able to understand the correlation of those artifacts with the events to help us understand the features, which helps us understand the overall happenings on the battlefield site, or whatever that site was, because we're not just talking about battlefield sites. We're talking about the event of the American Civil War. If we drop the word war, the American Civil, it becomes civilian, right? Which involved many more civilians and soldiers were actually involved in the conflict. And may I say something very dodgy here, but I think this is very fitting. When you got the emancipation of the emancipation of slavery and Abraham Lincoln's address after the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, and you've got the abolition of slavery, it would be very interesting to see what was happening to slave owner sites in regards to the paraphernalia associated with slavery in regards to that period of the American Civil War. Anyway, we'll leave that one there because that's very civilian. If you know where I'm going with that. Civil War archaeology in Georgia and other parts of the United States continues to utilize new technologies and approaches in order to understand the sites. Right, so what we're using is a technique that archaeology has used for quite some years, for about 30 years now, called GIS, which is Geographical Information Services, which is putting everything into really complicated maps and various layers of maps using all the information at hand, which has been collected by the archaeology and other accounts. So the technology and the ongoing understanding of these Civil War sites and other sites is helping us understand the history a little bit better, making the history be more human. There's nothing more inhuman than a battle. Yeah, there's nothing more inhuman than watching a film about war. That guy gets killed. Look at that guy having his head cut off, you know. That guy being shot. Oh, that guy on a horse over there is just being downed by somebody with a bow and arrow. Oh, isn't that funny the way he fell off the horse, right? It's not funny at all. These are actually people's sons, fathers, lovers. These are actually people. They've got a meaning. These were bankers. These were farmers. These were teachers. All of these things before the Civil War. So what we have to do is see the artifacts in giving a bearing on the meaning of these individuals that makes the individual story of the battlefields much closer to our understanding. If we can bring war closer to us, it makes us understand it a little bit better. Yeah. And actually, right, I've just realized in this lecture now something I've got alongside me on my desk, right? Which is actually, can you all see that? It's actually a bayonet, right? Yeah, and this bayonet itself is actually a French bayonet, right? This was collected in 1915, taken off a French soldier by a relative of mine who probably killed the Frenchman in the first place, right? But we won't go into that story. But the fact of the matter is, this is actually a French bayonet that was actually made before 1870. So this bayonet itself had been used and commissioned and utilized by the French army for, let's work out the maths, 45 years before it actually was collected by a relative of mine on a battlefield in 1915. This has got a massive story, a massive meaning, and a massive bearing on my understanding of the First World War. Just this bayonet, right? And also as well, I've also got this as well. Okay, this is a blade off a cavalry officer, a German cavalry officer, which was also collected in the same battle as this bayonet, right? And the story has it that a relative of mine who was a sergeant serving in 1915, we've got basically some of his war records alongside me, and basically there was back then there were still German soldiers on horses. German officer was coming towards his trench. A Frenchman jumped up, shot the German officer off his horse. And the story has it that this sword was collected from the German officer, and the Frenchman cut the rings off of the German officer while he was still alive to obtain his gold rings, right? And the family story has it that my relative wanted to kill the Frenchman for what he'd done to the German officer. And I think this is proof that my relative thankfully killed that Frenchman for killing that German officer and doing those terrible things to him. Now that is a real story, right? There's actually some realness in that. There's some actual feeling. There's some humanity. And what I'm trying to say is that the artifacts themselves give some real history, give some humanity to those people dying in that battle. Right. some empathy. As my great granddad, Sergeant Williams, Albert Williams, had in the First World War, the empathy for that German soldier. You can have empathy for these individuals on battlefield sites, the American Civil War, by the individual artifacts that you're finding associated with them. And also, the other thing as well is they're also using ground-penetrated radar. So in fact, metal objects that are actually under the surface, you can read them, you can work out what they are without even lifting them from the ground, right? So you can actually learn about all these other things. So what we're looking at, there's another really important, lots of really important battles in Carolina and Virginia. Another one in northern Georgia, known as the Battle of Chickamauga. What they're actually finding now, they're finding evidence associated with the Battle of Chickamauga. And actually, what I'd like to do next is actually talk about a prison camp, right? Built late in the war to relieve overcrowding at a prison, which some of you may have come across, known as Andersonville. Andersonville was a prison used to keep Union officers, and thousands of them died in conditions that are only akin to concentration camps. The Confederacy was unable to feed the officers in Andersonville. The general who was in charge, the Confederate general who was in charge of Andersonville, was later hung for war crimes. Again, what did I just do, Margaret? I just mentioned war crimes. People were put on trial for war crimes. So we talk about war crime trials in, for example, in the Second World War, but this is a true real war. The people were made accountable for their actions, and this is very important. What we're going to do now, right, is I want us to just move a few more images on. So obviously we've got that's clearly a penknife, because those would be on the screen there. Those would be mounting brackets for the wood or the ivory for the penknife. So you've got a penknife. That's your tool as I've described on the left. Do you know what? Right, I think that sharpened end there. This is actually more for a musket than a rifle, because you need to keep that black powder from not clogging up the pan. And obviously that's a bullet. And I think I know what this is on the left, but again, I can't remember what this one is on the left. Pete, help me on this one. I think I know what it is, but I'm struggling.
Well, I'm struggling as well. I can see it's a hook.
Yeah, but it's oh God, I know what this is. I know what this is. It'll come to me. I know what that is. Oh God, I know what that is. Look at that one there.
Water bottle, yeah.
But look at that. The soldier. Oh. This is not a Confederate. This is a Union canister.
Mm.
A Union water bottle canister that's been lovingly decorated by the Union soldier that actually. So in other words, right, this hasn't been found on a battlefield because it wouldn't be like this, right?
No.
But this is an artifact, right?
So it's like trench art, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And the other thing as well is the flag is a giveaway that this is probably very contemporary, because the flag obviously evolved after the American Civil War to include all the stars and stripes of the North and the South. But again, that's giving you another perspective. Yeah, you've actually just said it, Margaret. The trench art, that sort of portrayal of that idea of warfare. And I got to be honest with you, the perspective is completely wrong, because that's a little person there. Actually, in a way, if you do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get the I'm going to get, actually, interestingly enough, all of this might be in perspective, but this looks like it's been painted on afterwards or before, because that's completely out of perspective. Because everything else, all the other stuff, if you move that tent, all of this looks pretty good. I've got to be honest with you, and that guy there, right? But if you move the tent, you know, I'm probably thinking that maybe the tent was there beforehand and then somebody else decorated it. I don't know. But again, you've mentioned it as well. That idea of trench art as well. That sort of idea of placing into that mind of trench art. And this is how we see people portraying the battle after the events of the American Civil War. This is actually Gettysburg. This is actually Pickett's charge, slowly getting to the lines of men, right, that are defending this ridge. And I think I'm getting this right, Cemetery Ridge. But the Confederacy doesn't actually get through. General Pickett's charge does not work. Again, back to these again. We've mentioned these buttons, finding these buttons and the meaning for them and all the rest of it. And again, what we're actually seeing is photographic imagery of the day. This is actually more or less. I would say this is probably a few weeks after. Actually, that's all I would say. This is a few weeks after the battle because it's not overgrown. There's no decay, right? And this is down in the valley, so you can see that this is the Confederate defenses. This is Kennesaw Ridge again. This is the archaeologists excavating and thinking, right, is this representative of this image? Maybe it is. Maybe it actually is. Because obviously people are taking photographs back then. There's a photograph. Probably work out precisely where this photograph was actually taken by the vista in the distance. But obviously a Confederate victory. And then what I'd like to do is leave that on in the background, if I may. Right, I'm going to leave that on in the background. Very wary of time. So what I'm going to probably do is we could come to some of this other stuff. The Civil War POW camp in rural Georgia, uncovered by archaeologists in 2010. Archaeologists have uncovered one of the most significant Civil War discoveries in decades. This is rather interesting, right? What usually happens in war is that you know where the key stuff is, and the stuff which is over there, it's like abandoned and people go elsewhere and they forget about it. Nobody writes these things down. So Georgia Southern University archaeologist team excavated numerous Civil War artifacts from the Confederate camp at Lawton, a prison of war camp in southeast Georgia that housed some 10,000 Union prisoners over a 6-week period in late 1864. Until now, the short-lived site has been of little interest to scholars. The camp's exact location was unknown. That's interesting, because we've got books, we've got diaries written contemporary, we've got letters, we've got maps contemporary, we've got first-hand accounts, we've got people living on, we've got all this information going on, but still new things are found. Unknown camp. Nobody had written it. Obviously, if they had written it down, it had been lost. An archaeologist thought the possibility of finding anything significant and new was slim. But experts are now calling the unexpected findings one of the most exciting and intriguing Civil War discoveries of the modern era. So new things are being found. The archaeology excavated numerous Civil War artifacts from Camp Lawton is massively interesting, and it's on federal land as well. The announcement was made, and that they've allowed people to look at these discoveries and get people involved in this. And great, this is brilliant. Let's not keep this from people. This is 2010. Let's let everyone know, which is great. This is open archaeology, letting people breathe in the archaeology and say, oh my God, there's still stuff there that we didn't know existed, right? So this is a unique and very unexpected discovery. It appears to be one of the most intact at undisturbed Civil War archaeological sites found in decades. Stop. Nobody's been looking for it. Nobody's been metal detecting. Nobody had been looting from the site. This is brilliant. Federal land, and is taking great care to make sure this valuable resource is protected for the American people who are the owners of this site and these artifacts. So something new, something massively. This is the Lawton prisoner of war camp, the Confederate Lawton prisoner of war camp. So what I'd like to do now. Oh God, I've got two things. What do I do? I did promise this next one. So excavation and conservation of waterlogged archaeological textiles from the American Civil War submarine H.L. Hunley. Again, submarine. There you go. First time a submarine's used in war. So what we got during the excavation of the American Civil War submarine H.L. Hunley, archaeologists uncovered skeletal remains of the 8-man crew along with fragile waterlogged fragments of their clothing. Due to their fragility, the textiles could not be excavated in situ. They lifted it all up and looked at them in a laboratory. Most of the block lifts removed were composite in nature and contained a combination of textiles, skeletal remains, and artifacts. Due to the difficulty of excavating the blocks, an immersion technique was implemented in which the sediment could be extracted without disturbing its components. So what they did, they took these big blocks of material, they put them in great tanks, they excavated them, right, removed the liquids that were not appropriate, and then they excavated these in a laboratory. It's great. Using this technique, it was possible to uncover the textile remnants that were carefully manipulated and unfolded, allowing us to remove the skeletal material and associated artifacts. So in other words, everything was kabunked together. So again, we've got, in other words, another thing as well is, I keep saying in other words a lot actually today, but one thing is this archaeology is relatively new. It's what we're learning from the American Civil War is techniques that we can use when we're finding submarines that went down in the Second World War that might contain similarly preserved materials for the First and the Second World War that need to be interpreted. I know they're classed as war graves, right? But this is also a war grave. But to uncover the remains and to obviously give these combatants a respectful burial is very, very important. Now, I know about the H.L. Hunley, right? But excuse my ignorance. I'm just wondering. I'm actually quite convinced this is a Confederate submarine, but I could be wrong. So let's just get this one little bit of detail correct, right? Yes.
Yes, it is.
It is a Confederate. Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
it is. Yes, it is. Yes. The Confederacy were the first to. Andy, let's just chuck this in on there. Let's just say a little bit about the H.L. Hunley, right? So it was laid down in early 1863. It was launched in July 1863. It was in service from 17th of February 1864 and went out of service on the 17th of February 1864. All hands were lost. H.L. Hunley, Confederate States of America Hunley, was a submarine which played a small part in the American Civil War, but I'm sure you will all agree a massive part in the American Civil War. Hunley demonstrated the advantages and dangers of undersea warfare. So in other words, folks, this was the precursor for the sinking of thousands of tonnage in the First and Second World War by the Germans. Yeah, the Hunley itself was the first combat submarine to sink a warship. The Union States of America Housatonic. Although Hunley was not completely submerged and following her successful attack was lost along with her crew before she could return to base, the Confederacy lost 21 crewmen in 3 sinkings of Hunley during a short career. Oh, so in other words, before it, right, as they were practicing it, So Andy,
No,
explain a little bit more. Go on.
Yeah, they built two prototypes, and Hunley, the designer, was killed in one of those. So they lost 2 submarines before the attack, and then lost that one on the attack. Then they named that one the Hunley after him.
Well, okay then. Okay, Andy, let's get the stats on this, right? So, yes, it's likely that for the loss of 21 Confederate sailors and soldiers, the Hassanic, the USS Hassanic, probably went down with 200 lives. So, in regards to success, it was a successful sinking. Is that a good analysis, Andy? He's gone quiet.
Yep. Sorry, I'm having problems with the sound still on this system. But I don't think the entire crew of the I think it was called the Housatonic.
Yeah.
Was drowned. I think there's about 50 or 60 of them did drown, or it might have been more than that. But it definitely did sink it, and it did sink. It sank very quickly as well, in about 3 minutes, I think.
You wouldn't be expecting that in a wooden hole, would you?
No, absolutely not. They saw it coming. One of the lookouts spotted it and started shooting at the submarine, but they couldn't. By then, it was too late.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? These new weapons of war. These absolutely amazing new weapons of war, and we see these being used for the first time in the American Civil War. What I'd like to do, I said at the end I would just like have this little jump into this little thing I found on the internet. So let's do it. We'll all play with this one now quickly. We'll do this for like 5-6 minutes. It's a little bit of a game here. We'll look at this now. So I found this on the internet. I thought, wow, look at this. Somebody's put this little page together, and it's associated with little findings that have been done on various sites. Some of the ones we've actually mentioned today, and it sort of shows that. Look at that there. Just little collective stuff that people have actually. Artillery shell from Harper's Ferry. There you go. That's going to be a Confederate artillery shell, I think, from Harper's Ferry. So what we've got this is a good these are belt plates. So you've got a Confederate belt plate and a Union belt plate. Note that there's one Confederate belt plate and all the rest are Union Confederate belt plates, because there weren't a lot of Confederate belt plates produced, and Union belt plates that were recovered by Confederate soldiers, huge sort of plates that were usually associated with their other leather trappings rather than actual belt plate around the waist. So these could be worn in different areas of the body associated with leather belts and so on. But usually what they would do is capture Union belt plates and then erase the USA on them and then just stamp CSA into it, or just leave it as it was. So Civil War Artifact Preservation Association, I like that. All artifacts recovered from private land with owner's permission, so not federal land. And it's sort of given a little bit of information there about sort of various artifacts and what they're saying there. They're saying about a building associated with Antietam Creek in September 1862, and a hospital, a proper hospital. And I think what we're talking about there is this area that they're excavating. All these little areas that they're excavating this is where they're finding some of this evidence. U.S. belt plate, 2 of them there, from basically gardens that they're excavating associated with the hospital. More of these types of excavations going all the way through. More artifacts from other sites. This is the Battle of Funkstown, Maryland, which is just south of Washington, D.C. That's more canister shot. So basically, again, this would have been placed into a canister, fired from an artillery piece, and as it exploded, the shot would actually spread out and go everywhere. So that's basically canister shot. Bits of exploded shell fragments. Again, this is all really, really important. to understand what's going on in the battlefield. So obviously these fragments themselves on the right there demonstrate where an artillery shell exploded, and that is where people died. That is where people lost their lives. Yeah. So New York Staff Officers Civil War coat button, was that actually worn by a New York officer, or was that captured by a Confederate? And this is all really interesting stuff, and I do believe, I'm not sure at this stage, but I think the New York infantry battalions, there were actually black infantry officer battalions from New York a little bit later as well. Again, the Confederacy had black soldiers as well, so it's nothing unusual there. Little bit more information there. It's a bit higgledy-piggledy this, but it's good stuff. And there we go, a Civil War cavalry Burnside cartridge bullet there on the left with black powder. So there we go. So again, more evidence of, obviously this didn't kill anyone, so nobody died, or we don't know. Going down there, melted Civil War bullet from campsite fire pits. So basically, that's obviously a fire pit they're excavating, and we've got a bullet that's just been chucked in the fire. There we go. This is what these buttons look like on the obverse. Oh yes, that a kepi is a slouched hat. The typical sort of Confederate ones that come down, and you've got the rim there. So that would be a brass number used on a kepi or a slouched hat there. These are the smaller officers' size characters. So that's basically what that is. Civil War musket caps that had actually been fired from a musket. Evidence of leather. Again, I'm loving this because these are all little bits of evidence. Leather from a boot or shoe. Lots of time soldiers could not repair their shoes nor their boots, and they tossed them in trash. So obviously bits of boot there. So basically, if somebody's dead in front of you, you would take their boots if they had better boots than you, right? So pottery, there you go, some of the pottery that they're being used. Great. So we're getting closer to these people, get more of these plates. I'm not exactly sure what we're seeing on the right there. So I love this site. There we go, whiskey bottles. And actually, Michelle, can you come over here a minute?
Whiskey.
Can you come over that? We've got a rake like that. That's an American Civil War style from 1860. So that rake that we might have might actually be from that date.
Didn't know they made whiskey in the States.
Oh, Jack Daniels.
Jack
Daniels.
They made whiskey.
Jack
All the
Daniels.
cowboys drank whiskey.
Jack Daniels was from Wales.
Was he?
Yeah, he basically took the formula out to the United States and made whiskey out there. So you've got bottles. You can imagine a soldier there getting pissed after the battlefield because he can't deal with what he's seen, which is fair enough. We're like, that's fine. So you've got this is basically a shoulder. So you've got a J hook, metallic component. Its function was to secure the shoulder straps to the back itself. Civil War. This is going to be from the heel of the Civil War plate. That's to make sure that your shoes last longer. What else have we got here? We got scissors. Yeah, for anything. You're gonna have to repair your equipment. More Civil War buttons there. A cannonball fuse plug. Yes. So you're gonna have to take that fuse plug out, aren't you, to activate the fuse of the cannonball? I think that's right. More of these. This is how that would be attached into the leather there from the reverse of the front plate there. More of the musket balls. A mess knife, again, getting close to these people. that piece of exploded cannonball, that's going to give an indication of where people died. Again, that sort of humanity. A Civil War, a metal Civil War tent peg, a tent peg. Amazing. Somebody would have used that and carried it around to keep them dry throughout the whole campaign. There you go. That there is actually a bayonet. Now, we do have bayonets all the way back to the American War of Independence and beyond. Originally bayonets, what you would do, the original idea of a bayonet, you would ram your sword into the muzzle of your musket, and usually they couldn't get the bayonet back out, so they couldn't fire. So they basically added the bayonet on, so that you could still fire the rifle or the musket. But obviously, you know, that's the whole point of the bayonet itself. And then what have we got here? Oh, and there you go. So what is that there? God. Oh, drumsticks. I should know.
I was going to say, I wondered if they went into battle with the pipe and drums.
Yeah, no, they're drumsticks.
Yeah.
Amazingly, that's going to be made from mahogany, and the other one might be made from yew. So I used to have drumsticks like that, and look at that there as well. What we've got that from, it's talking an unfinished Harper's Ferry model lock plate after capturing the armory in 1861 and finished in Richmond. So there you go, lock plates from muskets. So that's what they are again. And finally, that little thing there, a hat band. An actual hat band. And that sort of completes what we've done today. So I wanted to do that little weird thing at the end, which sort of didn't need to make sense, but I wanted to just give you an idea. Just chuck that in now. I thought that was really, really useful. So what we're going to do now, we're going to see if there are any questions. Are there any questions, folks? Andy? Can't hear Andy. Andy?
Sorry, I had to switch it back on. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. No, so I only caught the very end of that, I'm afraid. So.
Oh, what a shame.
Yeah. My sound still keeps going off, and I have to keep resetting it every few minutes.
Andy, we're hearing you. So, Andy, I'm going to ask you for once, right? Is there any corrections of any of my interpretation of the military stuff you would like to make? I don't mind if I've got anything wrong.
I like I said, I literally have only seen the last 10 minutes of it.
Okay. So
I'm sure it was absolutely fine. So.
Andy, I don't mind. I don't mind being wrong, but this has been recorded, so you can watch this on YouTube.
I will, thank you, because I'm interested in that.
And I recorded this for you, Andy, only you and Jessica.
Thank you. Because I just, funnily enough, was looking at the Hunley only a couple of days ago. That's why it's fresh in my mind.
Yeah. Do you know what? I wanted to say the Confederacy, and I just want, you know, the Virginia and the, the Merrimack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The first ironclad battle.
Yeah.
Virginia and Merrimack. And the Confederacy had the first ironclad as well. So there are lots of firsts, but they just didn't have the resources. They just didn't have it.
Yeah. Or the funding.
Or funding. The Confederacy, I've always argued that if the Confederacy had won, or there'd been, if General McClellan had won the presidential election in 1864 and brought the war to an end, it's very likely that if the First World War had taken place, the Union would have supported the Allies and the Confederacy would have supported the Central Powers.
Ooh,
which would have,
yeah, that
would have been very odd.
Mm.
Or it could have led to the war never happening, which would have been a great thing not to have had the First World War ever happening. Do you know what? We'd have people on the moon if the First World War hadn't have happened. We'd have had computers 20 odd years before, you know, everything would have been changed, but that's history. Right. Right. Okay. Wonderful Claire. No? Claire did tell us she was 64, and I didn't believe her. So, you know,
You switched off, Claire.
she's muted. Never
You're
mind.
muted.
Ah, you virtually said everything that I've always thought about the Civil War. It's very humanistic war.
Yes.
I read a book once from a wife's perspective of her
Yes.
husband in the Civil War, and it was very moving.
The thing is with the Civil War, it's one of those wars that come into the category that it should not really have ever taken place.
Yeah.
There was like, okay, right, I'll say it. There's a reason why the Second World War took place. Germany financially couldn't continue on with the state it was in. It needed to declare war on Poland. It needed the resources. It needed to. Germany was afraid that Russia was going to invade. That was the Second World War.
All boiled down to Weimar Republic.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that there was a reason for the Second World War. There was no real reason for the First World War. It was absolute pointless war. There was a reason for there was a reason for the war against the Zulu. There's reasons for wars.
Yeah.
But when you actually go into this, the American Civil War, they always say it's over slavery, right? And I always say no, it's not. And the reason why and now I'm getting on my high horse. The reason why I say it's no, it's not, is all the people that were fighting those battles were human beings. They weren't fighting to keep slavery on or to abolish slavery. They were fighting for a cause, right? But the war could have so easily have been avoided.
Yeah.
Because
Loads of slaves were told that if they fought in the war, they'd get the freedom.
And most of them didn't.
Yeah.
And that was by both sides.
Yeah.
Margaret looks so depressed she wants to jump off a bridge now.
I didn't know that they'd taken the battle onto the sea. That surprised me.
It was massive. There's two facts I want to give you now, right? The first fact is that towards the end of the war, there was only one accessible Confederate port, and that was at Austin in Texas. And the other fact is that the last Confederate vessel to surrendered in around December 1865, when the war had already been over for 7 months. They were still sinking Union vessels months and months after because nobody had told them the war was over, and it went into port in, I think, Liverpool. And they were told the war had been over 6-7 months earlier on. So the Confederacy fought on even though the war was over.
I don't really know a lot about this, but was there a declaration of war in the beginning? Were they given warning?
Yeah, basically the Confederacy captured a fort called Fort Sumter, and basically the Confederacy captured this fort, and that was the start of war. If Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated by John Wilkes Booth in 1865, I think this was in April 1865, just before Robert E. Lee surrendered at Potomac Courthouse on the 9th of April. Actually, I think Abraham Lincoln was assassinated on the 5th of April or something, I can't remember. But anyway, the point is that it's said that if Abraham Lincoln hadn't been assassinated, then the terms offered to the Confederacy would have been a lot more lenient than were then later offered to the Confederacy. And if they would have been a lot more lenient, we may have not have had all this racial problem that we had years later. And the problem is Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by a Confederate officer called John Wilkes Booth, and John Wilkes Booth was looked after by a Dr. Mudd. So in other words, when somebody says your name is Mudd, that's where it comes from.
I didn't know that. How many states were there in the Union then at that time?
That's contentious if you add some of the other states like the Confederacy had around 11 states. When I say had 11 states, some sort of declared Confederacy, and I think the Union was around 20 odd, but don't quote me on that. The figures vary.
So the Union were trying to, there was some wavering areas, and I guess
Yeah, exactly.
They didn't want them to join the Confederacy. Is that
exactly
right?
There were states like Kentucky and Maryland who declared for the Confederacy, but it was also declared for the Union.
Right. Ah.
So in other words, it was like a liberal. We're not either conservative or Labour. We're in the middle. We'll either support the Labour. You know, you see what I mean? That's what we're talking about.
I don't understand who you seem to be favouring the Southerners, the plantation owners. Weren't they the bad guys?
Do you know what? I was hoping that wasn't going to come out at the end, but I did say I had a level of bias.
Yeah, you're for the Confederacy, who were slave owners, plantation owners.
Let's just not go there. And by the way, Abraham Lincoln was actually assassinated on the 14th of April, which was 5 days after. I knew it was one way or the other. 5 days after Robert E. Lee had actually surrendered. So, and actually, back to what I said, I made it clear that I don't believe this was about slavery. So don't put me in the same category as somebody agreeing with slavery.
It's about gaining the other wavering areas, I guess, isn't it?
Yes.
It's written by the winners, don't forget.
Yes.
What?
It's written by the winners.
Yes.
So they want you to look at it whichever way. And now politically correct is anti-slavery, even though a lot of them had slaves.
Yeah. In fact, Andy is very, very right. Slavery did remain in the Union until the abolition of slavery. So, you know, slavery did continue. So, right, anything you'd like to say, Dave?
No, thank you.
Right, what about you, Jessica?
Yeah, I agree. I think it is a very complex one. It is written by the winners. From what I could gather, it was over state rights as well.
Yes.
Have their own say on what they wanted to do, and I think that's a big part of it. I think the politics of America is quite strange, even looking at how the Republicans and the Democrats have changed their policy. They've basically become each other, if that makes sense. But it's very interesting. Thank you, Carl. And even the artifacts at the end were beautiful to look at.
Yeah, they were good. They were good.
I bet every family's got artifacts from that period, family heirlooms.
Yeah, I'm sure you got loads under your bed. Right, so are there any other questions on tonight? And I'll just tell you what we're going to do next week. No, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do next week, and then David can go. And what I'm going to do, I know what David's like. You disappear, so I'm going to say, David, if you disappear before I tell you, we'll see you next week. Next week, we're going to be looking at, strangely enough, Northumberland from the early medieval period, if I remember what we're doing. So Northumberland we're doing next week, which is going to be very, very different. Completely out of my comfort zone. Never done it before, and it's in Britain. So the early medieval period in Northumberland, no mention of Cornwall, no mention of Scotland, no mention of anywhere else like that, but we'll chuck a few pics in there anyway. So yes, if there's no more questions, I really appreciate you joining us today, Pete and Margaret and Claire and David.
I'd just
Jessica,
like to say,
go on, Peter.
The picture you showed of that shell, very similar in shape and design to the Palliser shells, which were designed for the muzzle-loading cannon.
Let's that was on the last thing we showed, wasn't it?
Yeah,
so,
it was on the very beginning of it, virtually. Yeah.
Hang on, let's just show this. Oh yes, you get your last word on this one. There we go, Pete. Go for it.
Yeah, that very similar to exactly the same shape as the Palliser shell, which was designed for the muzzle-loading cannon.
Is that the Moncrief muzzle loading cannon?
Yes.
And they were operated at Palmerston.
Well, the Moncrief was the gun carriage. The cannon. They were all forged at Woolwich, but the Palliser shell was designed to be pointed and penetrate the armor piercing of metal-clad ships and things.
Yeah, interestingly enough, that they're being designed for that, even though metal-clad ships were only being invented around that time in America's Civil War.
Right.
So
they were new.
So they were ahead of themselves, Pete, but they were never used.
That's right. Yeah.
Never used in anger. That's the word, isn't it?
That's never fired in anger. That's right.
Never fired in anger. Exactly. Never fired. So okay, then we're going to do the American Civil War in the future, but it's going to be more specific to some specifics to do with the archaeology. So we've done a massive overview now, so that's great. So okay, then I'm gonna, if there's no other questions, you can have a chat with me at the end. But anyway, Andy, Claire, and can I have a quick word with you, Andy, at the end? Anyway, I'll put off mine.
Yeah,
so Andy, Claire, Margaret, David, and Jessica, thank you very much. I will see you all next week. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
Bye all.
Cheerio.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, folks.
Bye.
Thank you, folks. I'll just stay. Right. So anyway, thanks for everybody watching on YouTube. I'm going to switch the YouTube thing